Welcome to InkThinks. Over the last few weeks, Dante from the Devil May Cry series has been getting a lot of attention for one reason or another. Between ongoing speculation about him coming to Smash, rumored leaks, and Devil May Cry 5 coming out last year, there has been a ton of talk about Dante and his chances of getting into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as DLC. Devil May Cry and its fans seem to have an on-again, off-again relationship, but the series as a whole is widely hailed as the pinnacle of the hack-and-slash genre. So, does Dante stand a good chance of making the cut and getting into the game? I'm gonna go through and break down every single argument both for and against him to determine his chances of getting into the game, and give my personal opinion at the end of the video. Let's get into it. The year was 1999, and the team behind Resident Evil was looking for a new direction to take their games. They wanted to lean a bit more into the action side of their games, while attempting to still maintain that survival horror atmosphere the series was famous for. After months of arrested development, they were unable to find something that felt true to the series, but still had that action element that they were looking for. On the brink of scrapping the idea entirely, Devil May Cry creator Hideki Kamiya convinced Capcom to rework the mechanic into an entirely new series, which he later dubbed Devil May Cry. From the outset, Hideki wanted to make the series as cool as possible. He researched the gothic areas of Europe to inspire the setting of the game, giving Devil May Cry its iconic style. He also loosely based much of the series on an old Italian poem called the Divine Comedy, which happened to be written by an Italian poet named Dante. From this poem, Kamiya took much of the names, concepts, and ideas of the afterlife to inform the direction of the game. He attempted to make the main protagonist, Dante, look as cool as possible. To do so, he gave him things like a long red leather coat, guns, and a laid-back attitude, with flowing white hair, thinking that it would somehow help the audiences latch onto the character. In further efforts to increase the coolness factor of the series, Kamiya wanted to make the combat feel as awesome and rewarding as possible. He opted for an arcade-like system of ranking combat with high scores and style grades to encourage a variety and ingenuity with the combat. Much of the combat revolved around an exploit that was found in early Resident Evil titles, which allowed you to juggle characters in the air to pull off combos. This mechanic became an iconic part of Devil May Cry, and went on to inspire many modern popular games such as God of War. All of these features came to a climax in the fall of 2001 when the very first Devil May Cry game was released. As I said earlier, the series has a love-hate relationship with a lot of fans. The first installment was a huge success, but the second entry in the series was widely hated. The third installment is widely considered the best of the series, but it was shortly followed by an incredibly divisive reboot that was later deviated from and went back to the main series and its original canon. Layer on top of all of this a confusing timeline and whatever this line delivery is.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
One might make the assumption that the series might not be very commercially successful. On the contrary though, the series has sold incredibly well, and it's become one of Capcom's flagship franchises. Since its release in 2001, Devil May Cry as a series has sold over 22 million copies, putting it well above the sales of a majority of the series represented in Smash, including most of the DLC that's been released at this time of recording, with the exception of Minecraft and Dragon Quest. When this is combined with the fact that Devil May Cry 5 just came out last year, the series is incredibly prominent in the minds of a lot of Smash fans. And yeah, I can understand why. With its sales, recent releases, and die-hard fans, Dante seems like a really natural pick to be in Smash. While there's certainly other very popular Capcom reps like Monster Hunter that I think could be likely, Devil May Cry definitely holds its own and seems to be on par with Capcom's other franchises in terms of likelihood. There is some conversation about whether the Devil May Cry rep would be Dante, Virgil, or Nero, the protagonist of the last few games, but I see this as a non-starter with the Smash speculation scene, because none of the arguments really change regardless of which character is selected. That being said, Dante still seems to largely be the face of the series and seems to be the most likely pick to me. Apart from sales, it's no wonder to me why so many people want Dante in the game, and why he may be an attention grabber for Nintendo. He's a young demon hunter with incredible power, but you'd never guess that from his fun and goofy personality. He's incredibly strong, but maintains a laid-back attitude. The lore, music, and atmosphere around his character and the game are a huge draw to the series, and his relationship with his brother Virgil is not only interesting, but it served as an inspiration for a plurality of gaming rivals from that point on. Take note, Pokemon, unlamify your rivals and make them cool again. Devil May Cry kickstarted the entire hack and slash genre and pioneered fast-paced and over-the-top action into 3D games. The impact and sales of the series and its characters are unquestionable, and it would be a mistake to deny that that might have a factor in Dante's chances for Smash Ultimate DLC. One of the other points that people cite in favor of Dante is the fact that he has an easy moveset to create, and that the Devil May Cry games are already on the Switch. Let's break both of these down real fast. Now, if you've been on my channel for a while, you'll know that I refer to the moveset argument as the zombie argument from hell. What I mean when I say this is that no matter how many times people dismiss this as a valid argument, it keeps coming up over and over and over again. Sakurai has shown us time and time again that he can come up with a moveset for just about anyone and make it feel creative. He's even done so for seemingly impossible characters like Villager, Captain Falcon, Piranha Plant, or, according to some people, Steve. People say that Sakurai was stumped by Chrom or Heihachi in the past, but both of these statements are taken from misrepresented quotes from Sakurai. From all available evidence, the moveset argument isn't valid either for or against a character. Dante would 100% have a cool moveset that's easy to imagine, but I don't see this working very much for or against his inclusion, other than maybe piquing the interest of Nintendo and Sakurai when considering him for an inclusion. As far as the inclusion of the game on a Nintendo console, we run into a logical fallacy. We assume that because Nintendo seems to be following a pattern, that pattern will form itself into a rule that they don't deviate from. It's a problem called the gambler's fallacy, which states that because something has happened repeatedly in the past, it's likely to continue into the future, even if we don't have concrete information to suggest so. Smash fans fell victim to the gambler's fallacy last pass when they assumed that because the first 4 characters were third-party reps, then the 5th slot would also be a third-party character. And of course, it was Byleth instead. We could also be potentially falling into the same trap with assist trophies, inclusion on Nintendo consoles, and more. The rule isn't even super closely followed, as we can see with characters like Joker or Pikachu who have never appeared on a Nintendo console. Despite this, we can see a precedent of Capcom being willing to work with Smash in the past. Franchises like Mega Man, Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Monster Hunter are all represented in the game, which shows at the very least that the companies are definitely in contact with each other, and at least semi-frequently work well together. But some people do point out that this is an oversaturation of Capcom content within Smash. For me, that doesn't seem like a super valid argument with the evidence that's currently available. We've seen many times in the past from companies like Microsoft, Square, and Capcom themselves that Nintendo doesn't seem to really set a quota for the amount of content that can be in a game or the amount of times that they're going to work with a company. So it seems difficult to say that they've suddenly reached their collaboration limit. There's also a few other arguments against Dante that are pretty easy to dismiss when it comes to determining his chances in the game. First off, people say that Dante has a sword, and they seem to hate that, but I don't think that factors into his chances at all. They make the same argument that there's too many gun characters, but once again, we haven't seen anything to really suggest that the amount of characters with a similar weapon could be deterring anything for Nintendo. A similar argument pops up around Bayonetta and Dante competing because they both come from a hack and slash. What this boils down to is people fearing that Dante won't be original, but just looking at the gameplay from the series and knowing the eccentric nature of its owners, I don't see a single thing that gives me worry of Dante being unoriginal, especially with Sakurai's prowess at faithfully adapting characters as DLC in a cool and unique way. Especially with the nature of Smash Bros. Already revolving around knocking characters up into the air and off the stage, Dante's style just seems like a really natural fit. I also quickly want to mention that Bayonetta was created by the same person as Dante. I don't think that really means too much though, because despite having Kamiya involved with both characters, they were developed and made by different teams hired by different companies. Not to mention, as I said earlier, I don't think that coming from the same company would even matter too much in the first place. Now, there are a few public statements from Hideki Kamiya and others that people take a few different ways in relation to Dante's chances of getting into Smash. Before I get into that though, I want to note that Kamiya can make any statement he wants, and is even rumored to be friends with Sakurai, but ultimately the characters are owned and handled by Capcom and Kamiya. In an interview with GameXplain, Kamiya and a Platinum game producer listed off a few characters that they'd like to see in Smash Bros. After being asked. While the question didn't limit them to Platinum and Capcom characters only, the duo exclusively discussed characters from those companies. Using GameXplain's translation, Kamiya said, "You've got to put Beautiful Joe in there, and you've got to put Amaterasu in there, and have those be the 4 characters. It's like then you could put put Leo in there and put Wonder Red in there, but then it would be more of my game at that point. Now, what's interesting about this is that phrase, and those have to be the 4. Immediately, it doesn't seem to make a ton of sense unless you consider that he might be talking about Leo and Wonder Red, but people seem to be overlooking that for some reason. And this has left a lot of fans to speculate about what it could mean. Some people believe that because Bayonetta is Kamiya's character, the addition of Amaterasu and Beautiful Joe would only equal 3, so the 4th character he must have been talking about is Dante, or some people also speculate Leon Kennedy or Jill from Resident Evil. In 2018, Kamiya put out a poll asking his fans which characters they would like to see in Smash. Dante was far in the lead before Kamiya deleted the whole thing. At another point in time, the voice actor for V in Devil May Cry 5, Brian Hanford, also said concerning Smash,
"This is what kills me about it, is I'm a new character.
Right.
And so I'm not in the DMC lore enough to ever be considered for Super Smash, and that would be like
I wouldn't say
the
that.
ultimate life goal. Are you kidding me? Like to be part of Marvel vs. Capcom or Super Smash Bros. Or
would be
both,
huge.
Which is what Dante is going to be. It's just like, come on. That's what I want.
The last public statement regarding Dante's inclusion comes from Devil May Cry director Hideki Itsuno, saying, "Well, you think about it, I'm pretty sure that they, all the characters in Smash, at least have some games on the Nintendo platforms, right?" He then went on to say that Cloud isn't generally associated with Nintendo, but the early games within the Final Fantasy series often were. Itsuno followed up with, "Well, that's the thing. Devil May Cry has never been on a Nintendo platform. So it seems like the first thing to do would be to get Capcom to put DMC on a Nintendo platform in some way, shape, or form, whatever that game might be." Let's break each of these down. Starting with the poll and statement about Capcom's reps to GameXplain from Kamiya, there is no denying that the deletion of the poll is slightly weird behavior. Some people online say that randomly deleting posts is a typical behavior of Kamiya, or at least not super out of the ordinary, but I don't know enough about him to substantiate that. But there are a variety of different reasons that he could have deleted the poll and excluded Dante, but we can't really know what they are or necessarily even assume that it's related to Smash. The statement about the 4 characters seems to be a bit of a nothing burger to me. The original audio was apparently unclear, and it's possible that he could have listed 4 characters according to GameXplain. The audio was just really difficult to understand because it was in fast Japanese and not super great quality. Or Kamiya could have been talking about the other characters I mentioned, like Wonder Red or Amaterasu, and it's especially important to note that Kamiya has said a few times that he has nothing to do with Smash, which I'm inclined to believe since he doesn't have a direct influence over the Devil May Cry series or Dante anymore from what I can tell. As for the voice actor's remarks, it's really weird. Would Brian Hanford know about Dante in Smash? It seems very unlikely, unless maybe he heard a rumor. To me, this sounds mostly like Brian lamenting, "Yeah, Dante's so popular that of course he's gonna be in cool games like Smash or Marvel vs. Capcom, and I'm just gonna be stuck here as someone unimportant to the lore," rather than an actual commentary on Dante's chances. The last statement about Dante being on a Nintendo console doesn't feel relevant one way or another to me, considering that he seemed to be speculating about a rule from Nintendo rather than imposing his own restrictions. Regardless, it doesn't matter too much since Devil May Cry is now on the Switch. Real fast, I want to mention that there have been some Capcom leaks lately. I'm not going to talk about these in depth. First off, they haven't confirmed anything about Smash or talked about Dante's inclusion in it in any way, shape, or form. But let me be perfectly clear on how I feel about this. I think that those leaks are immoral. They doxed a bunch of their employees, stole private information from a company, and to be honest, the leaks just suck the fun out of speculation. I'm not ever going to mention leaks like this on my channel. There's plenty of other YouTube channels for this. But just so you know my general take on it, they don't affect Dante's chances at all. So when balancing the strange statements with Dante's popularity and Capcom's willingness to work with Nintendo, I would say that things look fairly good for Dante. While I'm extremely skeptical of the public statements having any bearing on Smash, there is no denying the fan demand, sales, or popularity of the character. I really can't think of a single thing that I see genuinely working against Dante, and I can find a few things that I think genuinely help him out, putting him in a similar boat as Crash Bandicoot in my opinion. I give Dante a 6.66 out of 10. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. Who do you want me to cover next? Let me know in the description. Click the video on the left to see something that YouTube handpicked just for you, or the playlist on the right to see my entire final analysis series. Support me on Patreon if you want exclusive content, conversations with me, or feedback on your own videos. Talk to me on Discord for further discussion, and make sure to hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Until next time, stay smashing.